Assalamu alaikum everyone. You are listening to episode 31 of the Muhammad Ghailan podcast with yours truly as the host. You could also be watching it on YouTube, so shout out to the people on YouTube. Please like the video, comment, share it, and tag me on Twitter if you share it so that I can reshare it on my end as well and retweet it. If you don't know about my social media stuff, you can check the description box. You can find me on Twitter at Muhammad Ghailan. Facebook, the Facebook page is in the description box, and you can also connect with me through the contact page at andalusonline.org. Now, for today's episode, it's episode 31. We've done 30 episodes, we've talked about a bunch of things, and I get quite a few questions from you guys, especially through Facebook. Facebook seems to be the place where I get a lot of messages, and I'm seeing an increased number of messages coming from Andalus Online as well. Now, on the one hand, I just want you to know that I do read all of your questions. I really do. I check them out, I go through them, but replying is a whole other ballgame. It's very difficult to try to sit down, dedicate the time, especially those of you who've been following me know why I can't. It's medical school is a time-sucking endeavor. And it's one of those things that you don't really realize it or comprehend to what extent you have to dedicate time to your medical studies until you get into it. That's not to say that you're unable to do other things. I'm still able to do things. I'm still publishing articles. I'm still engaging to some degree on Twitter with some people. I'm still recording these podcasts, filming them, and I'm still conducting my medical studies and getting my work done and all that. I'm organized in that way. But ever since I started this, I've been finding myself having to be very deliberate in how I spend my time. And I have to choose and be very selective in what energies I spend my time on, because if I just kind of let it loose, things will get out of hand. So that's kind of the issue that I have right now. On the other hand, I do want to respond. And some of your questions are very insightful, very good questions. And sometimes they repeat themselves. Sometimes I get the same question written in many different ways, but it's the same question. So it's on the minds of many people, and I want to respond to these questions. Now, it's kind of hard to respond individually to the same question to every different person. So sometimes what I do, and I don't think I've told you guys this before, but sometimes the articles that I write that you come across, they're a direct byproduct of questions that have been asked to me over messages. I just didn't respond directly to the person. I just saw the underlying basis of the question, the assumptions, presuppositions, and figured out what the problem is and why this question arose, and then I wrote an article about it. So I kind of in an indirect way respond to the question. So that's why you should read my articles if you want to have some insight. Maybe your question was answered in that way. But that's not the case with everybody. Some questions, and you guys take the time, and this is what makes it very difficult for me, and I felt guilty enough for me I've been thinking about how to solve this problem, because I do feel guilty. You take the time to sit down, write your questions, sometimes pouring your heart out, and sending it to me, and then it's like, is he seeing it? Is he not going to reply? It's like, I want to reply, I am seeing it, I am recognizing the importance of it. And so what I figured I'll do is I'm going to get into this periodic, every once in a while, just dedicate an episode to you guys and just make it all about you, where I just take some of these questions and just respond to them. And let's see where it takes us. It could take us an hour, it could take us 2 hours, however long it takes. I'm just going to make it about you guys, and this is basically the first of it. So without further ado, we're going to start off with John, who's going to be our first question on these listener interactions. And by the way, I'm going to mention the names. If I don't get told, please don't mention my name. Some of you like to remain anonymous, and you do make it clear in your emails that you want to remain anonymous. Otherwise, I'm going to mention the name just for the sake of you recognizing that your question is being answered here. But it's not for anything else. Otherwise, if the subject is a little too sensitive, and I recognize you, even if you haven't mentioned that, then I will make it anonymous if it's a bit of a sensitive subject. Otherwise, your name is going to come up on this podcast, and quite a few thousand people are going to hear about it. So at any rate, we're starting off with John, and John asks, and John's is the longest question, by the way, so I'm gonna read. I truncated it. Even after that, it's still a bit lengthy, but I think he brings up good points. So John says, I just had a thought about sharing an idea with you after listening to the above referenced talk by actually a health therapist. And John, just a caveat here, John sent me a link for a health therapist who talked about people giving health advice, diet advice, and then you look at them and you're like, you're a fat person who doesn't exercise, doesn't do anything, and yet you feel the right to give me some health advice on what I should eat and shouldn't eat. And basically the gist of the talk of this health therapist was, you should walk the talk. You should be the thing that if you're going to promote something, you should stand up for it, and you should show off, and you should show us why we should believe you. I don't care if you have a degree in biochemistry, in nutrition science. If you're someone who is obese and doesn't exercise, I mean, why should I listen to you just because you did some studies in mice? So that was the talk that he sent me. So John continues on by saying, he made the point that you should always have the opportunity to look at the individual espousing the particular belief, and on various levels, look at how it has impacted on them. In his example, he was looking at the healthiness of the individual. I thought his suggestion of judging the teaching only by how well the teacher is could be applied to religious scholars, so we can see the impact of their beliefs on many aspects of their own life. Imagine if we knew the lives of teachers, preachers, then our perception of their teaching would be much safer to depend on. People couldn't teach impossible standards without appropriate levels of mercy, because they themselves would be expected to successfully implement them in their own lives. I myself have been a Muslim for about 27 years and live in the UK, and always on the lookout for people of tradition and Iman, belief, who are sincerely attempting to tackle the intellectual challenges of the modern world. If we had to shine the spotlight on ourselves at the same time as preaching, it would temper the religious demands we make on others. In a nutshell, how well do our religious teachers really demonstrate what they espouse is sincerely implementable by displaying it through their own lives, not simply on a stage? Another angle/analogy, in the tourist industry, technology has facilitated a lot more power to the consumer through reviews and customer photographs when advertising apartments. A company can't simply show a well-lit, ideally angled view of the most photogenic scene. They have to contend with customer reviews and even customer photos of the apartment. So, we can now make a more accurate assessment of where we want to stay. Likewise, it's not enough for a preacher to say this is right and this is good. We should see if they are right and they are good. How deeply do their ideals penetrate into their world? I think, so that was John's point, and it sounds quite reasonable to make this request. You want to see how well the person is acting on behalf on, or acting in line with what they're saying. On the other hand, there's a problem with that, because it doesn't recognize the humanity of people. Every single one of us has a greater ideal that we're trying to achieve. We all have these goals, and we know exactly what we need to get to these goals. But we have times where we lapse. Those times of us lapsing say more about us than they say about the truth value of the thing that we're teaching. In fact, even if you look at the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's not that he had, we believe that he's infallible, but he had this human aspect to his life. He was a human being. And so you look in, for example, in Surah At-Tahrim, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, why are you making impermissible the thing that Allah made permissible for you? And if you look into the tafsir and the story behind it, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was dealing with his wives, and they were getting jealous of him preferring to spend time with one of them, and she was giving him honey and giving him food that he really appreciated. And so they had this situation where they said, oh, you smell really bad. And that was Aisha and Hafsa radiallahu anhuma. They were saying that to him. So he made it haram for him that he will never eat that thing again. And so Jibreel came down to say, like, why would you do this? And so if you look, there was this kind of human interaction. You know, you're thinking about the Prophet ﷺ, and you're thinking about someone who is not going to speak out of whim. You're thinking about someone who is going to always be in line with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills. But at the same time, he was not an angel. You know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not send angels to us as messengers. Because if you want to think about like who is the most ideal kind of creature, you know, the closest thing, the most purest thing, we're thinking of angels. Now, if Allah had sent angels, that would set an impossible standard, because you would see it in practice. And when you set an impossible standard, what would be your comeback? They're angels. We're human beings. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends us human beings with their human tendencies, with their emotions. The Prophet ﷺ had emotions. He had times where his judgment wasn't exactly the best judgment, in the sense of, look at Surah Abasa wa Tawalla, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling him, you had Abdullah ibn Maktoum, this great companion, a blind companion, coming to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he was at the time talking to the leaders of Quraysh in Mecca. And he sallallahu alaihi wasallam felt that it was more important to deal with the leaders of Quraysh, because that was like a bigger deal. If one of them becomes a Muslim, that's a huge thing for Islam. Abdullah ibn Maktoum was the simple man. He was blind, and he was coming to ask the Prophet ﷺ about this religion. Now he had this expression on his face like, not now. You know, I'm dealing with this right now. So Jibreel alayhi salam comes down with this revelation. You frowned. Why would you make that expression? And the tafsir of it is, he chose the lesser of two goods. You know, he thought he was making a higher choice by going after the leaders of Quraysh, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling him the higher choice is this man, this blind, simple man that's coming to you. So his judgment, this, you could call it kind of, it wasn't the best judgment in this situation, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala corrects him. So that was the human aspect of it. If you're thinking about, I want to make sure that this teaching is realizable in that person in totality, you're making an impossible request, because nobody is perfect. And it is not part of the conditions of the Sharia that everybody has to be perfect before they command good and forbid the evil. You know, you look at anything you do in life. Look at education, for example. You know, you have these grading systems, and they tell you like you can achieve this and you will get this percentage. Hardly ever do you find somebody, even the smartest students, do they get perfect 100%. They always make a mistake somewhere. And in fact, they tell you, I can tell you right now just from a medical perspective, it's the mistakes that allow you to learn. The most dangerous person is the one who never makes a mistake. Because the one who never makes a mistake and is always perfect and gets perfect marks in everything, that person could be deluded by the time they make a mistake to think that they were right. It's egotistical. So you need to make mistakes. It's actually a benefit for you to have these lapses of judgment, because it's through these lapses of judgment you get reinforcement of a proper thing, of a proper idea, of a proper conduct, of a proper knowledge, how you should behave in the next time. So what you're looking for is not somebody who is fulfilling absolutely 100% of everything. You're looking for somebody who's trying to fulfill everything, and they're struggling with it. I mean, even if you look at the Quran, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah An-Nur tells the believers, like, you have times of privacy for yourself. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also tells the companions that once you eat with the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that's it, you're done, get up and leave. So there was this private time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave each one of us. And in this private time, everybody who knows themselves, they'll tell you, like, it's, you know, anybody that gets praised and gets deluded, they will start to believe the praises of the people. Because it's usually in your private time that you get these thoughts. You can behave in ways that might be questionable, that may not be in congruence with what you're saying. Now, the Prophet ﷺ tells us in a hadith that all of my people, كل أمتي معافى إلا المجاهر, أو كما قال صلى الله عليه وسلم. It's like all of my ummah, all of my people will be forgiven except for the one who sins in public, who boasts about their sins. So, yeah, you want somebody I mean, and that's why also the companions tell you, like Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu said, if you're going to take a guide, if you're going to take someone that you're going to place your faith and trust in, take someone who died. Don't take someone who's alive, because the living one, they're not safe yet. You're only safe from tribulation after you pass this portion, this region of life. So he warns against, putting too much faith and too much trust in the people. Now, if you look at even the analogy that this health practitioner is saying, yeah, there is validity to that you can look at someone who claims to know about diet, who has done all of these studies, but they look like they're out of shape, and it would be foolish for you to look at studies and assess them on their own merit and refuse to apply them in your life and even judge them as false simply because the person didn't apply it in their lives. I mean, if you look at the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he says, Al-hikmatu dalatul mu'min, that wisdom is the lost property of the believer. أَنَّا وَجَدَهَا فَهُوَ أَحَقُّ بِهَا. Wherever he finds it or he or she finds it, they have more right to it. That hadith tells you that you can find wisdom with anybody. It doesn't have to be a Muslim. And if that wisdom has truth in it, you take it and you apply it in your life. So as far as we're concerned, you have to look at life as a journey. It's not an end game. Now, when you want to see what people are doing, there are actually shuyukh, there are teachers that part of the teaching, part of their methodology is that you actually spend time with them and you go out with them and you travel with them. And I could tell you from personal experience, I've observed it. When you hang out with shuyukh, with teachers who have actually practiced this religion, they do it day in and day out. It's all in their behavior, and you see the impact of the teaching because they behave in that way. It becomes to such a degree that their normal kind of reactionary responses to daily events in life are in line with what they're saying. That's not to say that they're perfect. They have their quirks, everybody does. Everybody has their shortcomings. Everybody has their personality differences. But you do see it, and you do see the potential. That's the thing. You see the potential of where this could get you. And that's really what's important. If you think that you're going to find perfection and you're going to judge the religion based on the person like that, that actually is one of the primary reasons why some Muslims leave Islam and some non-Muslims don't even consider Islam. It's because they look at the people and they judge the religion based on the people. The thing is about the religion, it's always expecting more out of you than you expect out of yourself. That's always the case. It's expecting more out of you. You think you got it? No, there's a little bit more. You can always improve. And you can see that in sports, athletes. What are they always trying to do? They're trying to beat their best time. They're trying to lift more weight than they did before to beat their personal best record. I mean, they're doing things to see, and there's always this criticism. This could improve a little bit more. And they're always in this behavior. They're just trying to adjust. Oh, I could do this a little bit faster. I could adjust my mechanics this much. And they're usually thinking about minor changes that could have significant impact on their overall performance. So this religion is a journey, and I think it's better for us to focus on the teachings and to focus on our own selves to see how we can realize it. Now, when you talk about temper the religious demands we make on others, these religious demands, yeah, there is some personality. This for sure is a valid point to make. Many of us forget that we were at some point at one level, and then we improved and we went through, and our lives are journeys. Who I am today is not the same person as who I was 10 years ago. If I'm the same person as I was 10 years ago, I got a big problem. Now, when I talk with other people, I have to keep that in mind. I have to remember that I wasn't always this way. I have to remember that I'm always improving and trying to improve and working on myself. And what is easy for me today, what is incidental for me today, may have been a big deal for me 10 years ago, and I struggled with it. So it took time. It's the same thing as lifting weights in the gym or working out or doing something. What's easy for me today is not necessarily easy for me all the time. And also, because I have my own inclinations and personality quirks, some things come more naturally to me than others. So when I talk about the religion and when I teach about spirituality and things like that, I'm always trying to keep in mind that try to step into the other person's shoes. Try to see things from their perspective. Give people time to improve. I mentioned this in a Scattered Thoughts video where a Bedouin came to and this is an authentic hadith, a Bedouin came to the Prophet ﷺ and he was along with his companions, and he asked them about Islam and he said, listen, everything looks good, but this 5 daily prayers thing is a bit too much for me. I'll give you 2. And he ﷺ said, fine, I'll take 2 from you, it's okay. And the guy said, fine, great, and he left. Now the companions were confused by that because, what do you mean 2 prayers? Don't we have 5 obligatory prayers and we all have to perform them and we all pray at night and we do all of these things? And he ﷺ said, you know, the lesson from that is he's gonna do the 5. He just needs to be told that you're okay where you're at right now. Just work on yourself. And the prayer itself will impose itself on you. The prayer has an impact on the person if it's done properly, that Bedouin was not going to be satisfied with 2 prayers. He's going to perform the 5. But if I try to impose it externally onto him like that, I might drive him away. And I used to do the same thing with, you know, when I was an imam at a mosque back in Victoria, I used to get a lot of young people coming and they would tell me like, man, I want to come to Jum'ah, but I'm going to the bar tonight and it's kind of difficult for me to come to, you know, I don't want to pray and then go to the bar a few hours later. It feels wrong. And so from that you get the sense of at least his fitrah is sound, you know, he's got, you know, in Arabic we say عنده دم, you know, this person has some shyness to them. They recognize that this is not a right thing to do. But I didn't focus on that. I said, dude, just don't worry about it. Just come, it's okay. Just come and pray and then we'll deal with that later. And mashallah, you actually do find people giving up on this lifestyle and just deciding to be a little bit more spiritually connected. But you're not trying to push people away. And so when you make these demands, you have to temper them and you have to speak to people according to their own states. Like Imam Ali radiallahu anhu, he said, حَدِّثُ النَّاسَ عَلَى قَدْرِ عُقُولِهِمْ أَتُحِبُّونَ أَن يُكَذَّبَ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ. Speak to people according to their states. And that hadith speaks, that statement of Imam Ali is just amazing. That statement has so many different ways to kind of understand it and apply it. On the one hand, you have to recognize the educational background of the person. So if you're going to speak about Islam and the teachings that it has, and try to utilize a language that maybe it's not their field of study, or you're going to try to appeal to them in a way that is going to drive them away, that's not right. So you're going to have them reject a message based on your presentation of it, not based on its own truth value. You also have to look at the people's state themselves. What is more important? I get people asking me like, oh, you know, the hijab, or you know, drinking and smoking weed and doing all of that stuff. I'm like, listen, just for a second, let's just chill back and just take a step back. Are you praying your 5 daily prayers? Are you fasting the month of Ramadan? To me, these things right now are more important, and let me just get you doing these things. A lot of us don't recognize the power of this religion to transform people, and we focus on the people themselves, and that's the big problem. So if somebody were to engage in their 5 daily prayers properly, and that's all you ask of them, just do the 5 daily prayers. And you know what? Recite Surah Al-Asr and Surah Al-Kawthar. You know, like the shortest chapters of the Quran after the Fatiha. Recite those and just don't do any more, and just focus on that and take that, you know, 3 to 5 minutes and just pray it, do it properly, and just, that's all I want from you. I don't focus on anything else. I don't talk about anything else. I just want them to do it. Ramadan comes, dude, just fast your Ramadan. Don't even come to Taraweeh if you don't want to. It's fine. I'm not going to burden you with a lot more than you can handle. You're already having issues with your fasting. So just do that and get that straight. You actually do, and I've seen it with my own eyes. Transformation takes its place at the rate that is appropriate for that person, at the development for that person. And in fact, if it happens too quickly, it's not a good sign. I temper people. I tell them, like, you're moving too fast. Let's just back up, slow down a little bit, because I don't want you to injure yourself spiritually. Just like when you're in the gym with Just a side note, I used to be a personal trainer way back in the day. And if I see somebody going too much, I tell them, like, let's just take some weights off. We don't need to do all that. We're not going to go to failure and burn out and do all that stuff. I need you to get stronger. I don't need you to injure yourself so you never come back. So we temper people like that, and we kind of go through this process. So I hope that these are just some perspectives on these analogies. They have some validity to them. Is that if you're wondering if this is realizable, is this possible? Is this person asking too much? Well, they're not, because we do have examples. And if you talk to a lot of students of knowledge, a lot of teachers, and who spend times with teachers, they will tell you kind of the same thing over and over. It's like mutawatir, as we say in the tradition. It's multiple transmission of the same kind of experience, which is a lot of people will tell you who spend time with teachers that this religion is haqq, it's true, and the teachings are not overwhelming. They're not they don't need to be tempered in that way, because we do see them being realized in these people. What is not realized, or what is not receiving enough emphasis, is these teachers that we're talking about people that are 60 years and up, who have been practicing this religion for a minimum of 50 years or 45 years or whatever, and diligently, and they were adhering to it from a very young age, and they were grown up in a very spiritual environment, and so they've been working on themselves for that long. And so that end result that we see right now, which is still a work in progress, because you're always going to be a work in progress until you pass away, that result is an accumulation of that many years of practice. So they give you the same teachings. The rate of how it gets applied differs between people, and if you make the truth value of the teachings based on how quickly it gets applied, or who makes it, who applies it and who doesn't, you're going to have problems. So I hope that helps you out, John. The next question comes from Sayyid Islam, and Sayyid asks, are you able to share your daily routine? How you start your day from the time you wake, and also the time you wake to the time you sleep? I'm assuming you work. I know you study and obviously socialize with family and friends. With that in mind, how do you balance everything? I get up at subh time. So for us here in Brisbane, that's around 5 a.m. or so. So that's kind of the time that I get up, between 5 and 5:30. Get up, do my prayer, pray subh, do the morning adhkar, recite my daily portion of the Quran, and then I immediately after that jump on. I have breakfast actually right after that, because it's just like my daily routine. I need to have my food right away after that. So that happens around 7 o'clock, let's say. 7 a.m. is when I'll have my breakfast. I try. It's hard for me to do this. It's one thing, I say you should, but it's my personality doesn't like it. You should have breakfast and be present with your breakfast and don't do anything else. But I don't do that. What I do is I fire up my flashcards, my Anki deck, which is for those in medical school who know about it. So I fire up my Anki deck, and I have this daily allotment of flashcards that I need to do for my medical education. So I go through them while I'm eating, which is not good. But sometimes I do eat with presence and don't do that. But anyway, so after breakfast or during breakfast, I start up these flashcards, I do them, and then after that, it's just a quick revision, or usually I have something going on with regards to, I have to go to a tutorial or have to go to a practical or something, so I kind of prepare for that before I get going, and those usually happen for me around 10 o'clock in the morning. So between 7 to 10, it's between doing these flashcards and preparing for whatever practical thing that I need to do, whether it's clinical coaching or case-based learning, or if it's anatomy practical or whatever it is. So between 7 to about 9 o'clock, I study and prepare for that, and I do my flashcards, and then 9 o'clock I take off and I get on the bus. And on the bus, or on the way to the bus, because it's easier for me to take the bus. I could drive, but it's just too much of a hassle. And I use this time to listen to podcasts or listen to something beneficial. So on the bus, I will listen to whatever podcast that's I feel relevant for me or interesting that came up with a new episode. Podcasts I listen to, I listen to the Mad Mamluks. I listen to NPR, different types of podcasts for NPR, and follow up on politics and such. So I do that while I'm on the bus, just getting to the university or to the hospital. And and then I get to my case-based learning. That takes some time. By the time I finish my daily activities that require my presence to do practicals or coursework or whatever, that usually ends around, goes from 10 till about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then I get back home around 3 o'clock, 3:30, pray, and then I take off to the gym. And I spend about an hour in the gym, and I alternate. Right now I'm on this full body training routine 3 times a week, and the other days of the week I'm doing cardio for an hour. So I do that, get back home around, let's say 4:30 or so, and have my lunch/dinner. And then Maghrib for us right now is around 5:15, 5:30, somewhere around that time. So I pray Maghrib, and I get on my coursework again. So I'll listen to some lectures that were assigned, or just make new flashcards, or review some material, or do some course readings. And then I will work like that till about, 9 o'clock or so. And then around 9 o'clock, 9:30, I'll go on to Andalus Book Club. I'll check whatever has been posted over there, respond to whatever needs to be responded to. Or if I don't go in the book club itself, I'll pick up the book that's being discussed and kind of review it and go through it a bit more and see if there's any salient points that need to be brought out from it. And then I'll do a post at some point for the forum. And so that goes on till about, 11 o'clock or so. So that's just like a broad stroke of what I'm doing throughout the days. And then the weekend is that I have more time, because on the weekend there are sometimes during the weekdays I may not have practicals to go to, so that allows me more time to dedicate to other things. And when I do have that time, I utilize it to either review something, I read something from the Islamic tradition, review some fiqh. On the weekends, I would connect with my teacher. Usually it's over Skype or a phone call. And that doesn't happen every single weekend, but when I do need to connect with him, that's how I do it, because he's back in Vancouver. And what else? So that's kind of a broad stroke of what I do. It's an organic day. It's kind of hard for me to tell you, like, it's militant, it's this time, that time, that time. And the reason it's organic is because I kind of approach it kind of like the prayer. If you look at the 5 daily prayers, they're not at exactly the same time every day. They move around. And the reason they move around is because the earth moves around. The earth rotates, the sun, and it's on an axis. And depending on the season, the sun rises and sets at different times, and its movement determines when the shadow changes. And so all of that tells you that Maghrib and Dhuhr and Asr and Isha and Subh, they change a little bit. They're not set in stone. I'm not mechanical like that. So I don't have things set in stone per se, but I have almost like a daily goal, tasks to accomplish. And I know what everything requires for a time commitment, and so I spend the time on it. And I give it, and I know, like, all right, so this is, I need to spend time on this, I need to spend time on that. And so I know I have an allotted day like that. I don't write these things down like in a way to set them in stone and be militant about it, but I do write them down to know, like, I need to accomplish these things. The only times that I have where I don't have a choice, like these are the times for them, are when it's assigned by the university right now. Because they tell us, like, this time you have to be at CVL, case-based learning, another time you have to be at anatomy prac, physiology prac, clinical coaching, you need to go there. So these times are set out ahead of time. And so that's where I determine, I organize my day around these things as well as around my prayer times. So that's kind of like prayer is the number one thing, where I organize my waking and sleeping hours according to that. And then the rest of my daily activities outside of things that are imposed upon me through scheduling from the university, I organize them around prayer times, and I just continue on like that. But I do set aside times. Like I said, I have this time. Every day I need to go to the gym. Like that's a non-negotiable thing for me. I need to do it because I need to get that energy out, and it's kind of meditative for me to go to the gym and lift some weights, or run around and do some cardio. So that's a meditative thing for me, and I need to do it. Reading and writing something for Andalus Book Club, or for my articles that I write and stuff. And I have commissioned articles that I write from time to time. And so these things become non-negotiable for me. I need to do them, and they are a way for me to stay abreast and to stay connected, and always updated with my knowledge with regards to the Islamic tradition and my seeking of knowledge itself and research. So I continue to do that. But yeah, man, it's I hope that kind of answers it for you, Sayyid. I'm very, if you try to follow me every day, you'll find that it's not always the same thing, and it changes from day to day, but somehow I try to get through things and accomplish things. Ramil Zayat asks, if I would like to attain a traditional Islamic education while being a full-time student, is that realistic? If so, is there a curriculum somewhere I can follow such that I have a structured approach to the way I learn if I were to attempt it on my own? How were you able to balance attaining a PhD and an Islamic education at the same time? I am a medical student in Canada and have recently come to realize what a great gift a traditional Islamic education is. I almost wish I could have studied Islam before going into medical school. I'm currently studying with the people of knowledge in my small city as much as I can, and would like to dedicate more of my time to learning Islamic sciences. I'm unsure how to approach the subject and would appreciate any insight. So if you have a connection with teachers in your locality, that is who you should stick with, and you should definitely, I would say, just start off with basic fiqh texts. These are the most important things you need to figure yourself out with. Because there's so much packed into them. Even the most basic fiqh text will teach you things about the tradition and how it works that will serve you in the long run. Beyond that, if you want something a little bit more officially kind of structured, and don't have access to that in your locality, I would go online and I would say check out Seekers Hub. I know the teachers who was headed by Sheikh Faraz Rabbani, and it is by far, when we're talking online, it is by far the best resource out there for you. It's free. They have this tri-semester system, so you can go and start off with a couple of courses or one course. You're a medical student, so I definitely would not recommend you take on too much. I would say take on just a little bit. That would allow you to you don't want to jeopardize the primary thing right now that you have going on, which is medical education. This foundational years, you're a medical student, this is a foundational time. You're building a foundation. You do not want to make that foundation weak. It's going to harm you in the long run. So that's your primary priority number one. Beyond that, you do have extra free time. If you organize your schedule properly, you are engaging in activities that you could, do away with and make more benefit of your time. You should have free time for you to just entertain yourself and just be able to, go out and as the Prophet ﷺ said, sa'atan wa sa'a, take some time for yourself so that you can have this ease. You don't want to be overwhelmed with all of this stuff. It can get a bit tiresome. So you should set aside time for entertainment. But if you want to study Islamic stuff, I would say just pick something basic to start off with. And Seekers Hub is great for that because they have these different courses. Take something that is foundational with regards to that. And I think they have a program right now where they've set up like a curriculum for you to gain a certificate at the end of it, if you go through it all. So I would say just take on one course at a time and just take your time with it. This is a lifelong journey and you don't need to rush it. How did I balance it while attending a PhD? Doing a PhD is a bit different than what I'm doing an MD right now. If you ask me like right now as an MD, like would you go back and can you do what you did while you were doing a PhD? I would say no, I couldn't, because The thing with a PhD is your time is a lot more freer. Although I did spend long hours in the lab when I was doing my research, there were also times when I had free time in the evening, and I didn't necessarily have to take my work with me home. So when I went home and had the weekend, I had the weekend to myself. During the PhD, you're doing your reading, you're doing your research, you're doing everything in the lab, and you don't have to take it with you home. It's not the end of the world if you don't know about it the next day. With medical stuff, it's with you everywhere. You're doing it all the time. So it's kind of hard for you to try to build a foundation the way that I was doing with a PhD. I think I would have a very hard time doing what I was doing while I was doing a PhD with regards to Islamic education. Right now, it's more of a continuation for me as opposed to trying to build basics. So yeah, I would say connect with your teachers. There's nothing better than having a personal presence with somebody. And then to add to it, then do Seekers Hub, which is great. Take one course at a time and start off with fiqh, and then follow it up with Arabic, and then follow it up with spiritual purification, and build on that as you go. The fiqh will build for you Islamic legal perspective of what is, especially the obligatory acts, because a lot of Muslims, unfortunately, don't even know the basics of what is obligatory and what is not. They don't even understand the differences of how something could be halal and something could be haram. And just basics on usul, even foundations of Islamic law. These are important things to learn about. So you start off with that, purification, stuff on purification of the heart, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَالٌ وَلَا بَنُونَ إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ, on a day where nothing will avail for you, no wealth, no children, unless you come to Allah with a sound heart. So there's a science to that. There's a way for you to purify yourself. So you gotta take that. Arabic, because that's the language of the Quran. You need to understand it if you want to delve deeper into the Quran. And this stuff, you should do it with the approach of, I'm doing this for myself, not necessarily with any grandiose goals beyond, I just want to know because I want to get closer to Allah. And if Allah wants to utilize you in a way to serve the ummah and for you to link all of these things together, you will find blessing in your time that way. If you take too much, you won't get much. Ula Muhammad Ali, I have been at a loss for some time, she writes, wondering who to ask about direction for answers on certain topics that involve science, human psychology, Islam, etc. I'm in a similar field, currently pursuing my graduate studies in clinical psychology. A search led me to Psychology from an Islamic Perspective by Aisha Utz, but it raised more questions than answers. I finally realized that there is a very clear answer right under my nose, the Quran. The issue then became that even though I speak Arabic, reading the Quran is not the same as understanding it. There are many videos and writings out there from various scholars interpreting bits and pieces here and there, but the inconsistency with which I access these resources and the discontinuity in flow and absence of systematic approach is making it a challenge for me to get much out of it. I figured then that perhaps attempting to understand the Quran itself, the Quran myself, may not be a terrible idea. You have mentioned a few times that the Quran can be approached as a science. I am, however, missing the foundation. I'm wondering if you can recommend some online courses or a credible institute that offers courses on the science of tafsir. A Google search has given me many results, but I thought as a scholar yourself, not a scholar man, you may be able to recommend something authentic and credible. I would say, if you're looking for online, I just mentioned for Rami, Seekers Hub. You need to start off with Seekers Hub. Tafsir is like a very high level thing. For you, if you look at the tafsir of Ibn Juzay al-Kalbi, I believe it is, he lists in the introduction to it all of the different fields of study that you need to master before you engage in tafsir. And basically you have to master the tradition. That's not to say that you may not be able to gain insights into the Quran based on your background, but it is to say that it is a very dangerous thing to say that you can just approach it yourself and figure something out without any aid in the matter. So you need to, if you want structure, and just like I mentioned in the previous question for Rami, online, Seekers Hub. I'm not associated with them, by the way, I should mention. And anything I mention here, aside from Andalus, because Andalus is my baby, I'm not associated with these people. So I'm just saying it out of genuine, like, I actually believe in what they're doing. It's fantastic. So I would say go to Seekers Hub and start off there. And just like I said to Rami, you need to start off with basic foundations of the Islamic law. You need to get into understand Arabic at a more of a technical level, if you will. And what I would say is, once you get into that and have some access to a teacher that you can have a relationship with, that you can have a discussion back and forth with, then pick up a tafsir. Like, I really like Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi's tafsir, because he was a scientist, and so his take on things, it's one of the longest tafsirs, if not the longest tafsir that you can ever pick up, by the way. But his take on things, and he offers in it all of the different insights, you know, the scholars come up with regards to law, with regards to Arabic, with regards to all of these different, but because of his background, the way that he interprets things and the spirituality behind it, I think you would gain a lot of benefit from it. But you need somebody with you. I mean, whenever I read something, alhamdulillah, if I find something that I'm unsure, like, am I getting it right or not, I just make a phone call and check with my teacher and confirm and see if I'm on the right path, the right track or not. And then I get told, like, check out this other thing. Because, you know, when you have connection with teachers, they'll always direct you to all of these different texts and resources that you may not be aware of as a student. You're just kind of trotting along and trying to get there. So when it comes to Islamic psychology, the other source I would say is, I just heard about them the other day, Khalil Center. I think they have a branch in Chicago, they got a branch in the Bay Area, in California. Connect with them, because if you feel clinical psychology, they have a psychiatrist in the Bay Area on staff, and they have teachers of Sharia, Islamic tradition. So I would say connect with them, and they might direct you in directions that you or I may not be aware of. So I would say start off with them and see I would say start off with Seekers Hub if you're wanting a structured approach to the tradition from an online institute. And I would say connect with Khalil Center and see what they have to offer there, and see what you can do with them, and who you can connect with there who can benefit you. Nivia Martinez, I am writing to you seeking advice on an issue I've had for quite a while. I feel like you may be able to help me since you have a background in neuroscience. Basically, I'd just like to know how I can become smarter. Some of the weaknesses I have are having a short attention span. I have difficulty grasping concepts. It's extremely difficult to recall information verbally, and I have a pretty short memory. I do not communicate well verbally and have a difficult time saying what's on my mind. The challenges that this has brought me in my life is not being able to get ahead in a career. If I didn't have a husband, I wouldn't be able to support myself since my earning ability is low. I tend to have shallow conversations. I can never participate in smart conversations when I'm around friends and or family, and it makes me socially awkward at times since I feel intimidated by people who I can't carry conversation with. In my deen, my issues have affected my ability to retain Islamic knowledge. I attended a course in Al-Azhar for a month, and if I'm asked to recall a few things I learned, I'm unable to. I always forgot the meaning of terms and even forget things like what the 5 pillars are. It's quite embarrassing to forget such basic fundamental information about Islam. Can you recommend anything for me or give me some advice on overcoming this? I feel that perhaps this is just who I am, and I just have to accept it. Well, first of all, Nivea, this was a very well put together question. You are actually not awkward at all. You have very deep insight into yourself. This was very well written. I mean, maybe your issue is just translating what you write and being able to verbalize it audibly. Because when I look at the way that you wrote this, I'm not seeing any of the things that you've criticized yourself for. I don't see it. I don't see an awkward person. I don't see someone who can't carry on a deep conversation. I don't see any of this stuff. In fact, I guarantee you, if you sat down and just spent more time writing, you will improve maybe your ability. The thing, people ask, like, how do you get to this position, you know, of being able to speak and have a constant stream of thought that is coherent to some degree, in some way, and it starts off with writing. I'm a firm believer in this. If you're not writing, you're not thinking. You have to write. So I would say for you, and it's a problem with, I don't know how you got your, what happened, how the teachings were conducted in this course that you did. But one of the things that Muslim scholars were dealing with initially with regards to, and this is an interesting insight, one of the problems that Muslim scholars had with mass printing is, and they talk about this in their text, students used to have to go and exert effort into, first of all, you had to borrow the book from somebody who had the book, and then you had to take that book and write it out yourself. You had to make a copy for yourself by hand. So you had to exert so much effort to have your own copy of the book before you return it back to its original owner. And for you to learn something, you had to go off and memorize it and sit down and take your time with it. This culture that we're living in right now, though, it's asking for us to retain a lot of information or go through a lot of information very quickly. And the modern education system is all based on, there's hardly much effort given. You know, it's even memorization is almost vilified. Like, it's not a good thing for you to memorize. You should memorize it. It trains the mind. Think about, I don't know if you listen to music or not, but I guarantee you, you know some songs. Even if you don't listen to music, at some point, you've heard something because it's all over the place, that you find yourself humming along and starting to get along with the lyrics. And the reason for it is repetition. You've heard it so many times, you just know it. So this is kind of the trick that you have to do. And the way that you do it, I'll give you the rule of 5. So if you want to memorize, and it's funny that you mentioned 5 pillars, but it's just the rule of 5. Anything you want, any concept, any bunch of information that you want to remember, take them in numbers of 5. And always link them with something. Make associations. So if you're getting introduced to a new concept, I'll give you an example, actually, because it's relevant. It just happened now. So just a few weeks ago, we were covering the cardiovascular unit module in the medical program. And one of the things that we went through a week of congenital heart disorders, and one of them was the tetralogy of Fallot. And it has these 4 aspects of, or 4 malformations of the heart that are present, 4 abnormalities of the heart that are present at birth, and they're congenital. And it's called the tetralogy of Fallot because it was discovered by this individual, this physician, who named off these 4 things in the heart. And so at first you're kind of having this difficulty, like, all right, so what are these things? So you think right ventricular hypertrophy, you're thinking ventricular septal defect, pulmonary atresia, and overriding aorta. So this may not mean much to you, but just a couple of, you know, but it doesn't mean much to most people. We just take this information and we memorize it. But now, just a couple of days ago, Jimmy Kimmel on his show talks about his newborn son, Billy, and he has the tetralogy of Fallot. So now there is this connection, there is this association. I've had the story, I've heard it now. I will never forget this. I will never ever forget it. And it has a meaning because the way that he described all of that stuff. So one of the big things that memory champions do, and I'll recommend a book for you. I can't remember the author's name right now, but the book's title is Moonwalking with Einstein. And this book is all about memory. Memory champions, memory competitions, and memory tricks to do. And one of the major things that people do, you know, you get people that take decks of cards and you give them, say, a minute to look at the order of the cards in the deck. You shuffled it and then you give them an order and then you ask them to memorize it in a minute or something like that. They look through the deck and then in a minute they can cite for you the exact order of everything and you think, oh my God, this is amazing. Well, these people are actually trained to do this. Most people don't have that come naturally to them. They're not savants in that sense. And one of the things that they tell you, it's kind of a common thing that they all do, is they create a mental image for these things. So let's say you want to go and buy groceries and you think like, all right, so I need to get some milk, I need to get some lemons, I need to get some salt, I need to get some garlic. And so what you do is you actually go through the kitchen and you start to imagine things, and you can make it ridiculous. So if you want to remember milk, imagine, create a story for yourself. And the story could go something like, I took some salt and I put it onto the lemon, and then I licked it, and have this visceral reaction to it. And then as I was walking out, I opened the fridge door and the milk just spilled on the floor. And as I'm looking for paper towels, I'm looking all over the place, and I put my hand into the cupboard and I touched the garlic, and the smell of the garlic got stuck on my fingers. So now when you go shopping, you don't have to have a list with you. You can just think, all right, so what happened? I opened the door, the milk spilled. First I tasted this lemon. Oh, I need to get lemons, and it has salt in it, so okay, I need to get some salt. And I opened the fridge door and the milk just poured out and it's all over the floor. And you're imagining, you're actually picturing these things happening in real time. So when you're in the store, you go, all right, so I need milk, I need lemon, I need salt, I need garlic. And I need to tell you, I just thought of this just off the top of my head right now, and I remember all of this stuff. And I can guarantee you, come ask me tomorrow, I remember this because I created this scenario. And so if you want to help yourself remember stuff, you need to create scenarios in your mind. How do you do that? You just create a story. So a lot of these people, when they think about their card decks, they're actually placing the decks there. They have an image that they've memorized. So some of them tell you, like, I imagined this, some street in London, for example, or wherever it may be, Fifth Avenue in New York. I go around there all the time and I know exactly where all the buildings are and what the building names are. So then what you do is you start to create, you add to these buildings these features of the thing that you're trying to remember. And so create a scenario. Don't try to memorize things in isolated, cryptic kind of code. Create a story. And when you create a story, you will never forget it. So that's kind of what I do with a lot of the stuff that I'm studying right now. I'm creating stories in my mind, and that's how it helps me solidify this information. Because if I can tell you, if I try to just memorize it, rote memorization, without any context to anything, I'm going to have a hard time. I have a hard time doing that if there's no context. I need a context for anything that I study so that I can kind of put it together. And that's kind of what I do with a lot of things. And you can do it with anything. Even when it comes to Islamic studies, you want to memorize the 5 pillars. What you can do is you can, I would recommend you start reading the seerah. So you can create the context within the actual thing that you're trying to study. So Islamic studies, read the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ and look at when these things popped up. When did they get introduced? And as they get introduced, you create this story in your mind now. You have the story from the seerah and you remember it, and then you can remember all of this stuff. Now, when it comes to engaging in conversations and such, I gotta tell you, it is hard sometimes when the crowd is not helping you out. So it depends on the audience. It depends on the people you're interacting with. Maybe they don't want to have deep conversations. Maybe the reason you're having superficial conversations is because the crowd you're hanging out with is superficial. No disrespect meant to your friends and family, but it's just, I can tell you from personal experience, I don't talk about a lot of the things that I talk about on my podcast or write about with friends and family. And that's not to say that they're superficial. It's just not the right time and place. Sometimes you just want to, just hang out and talk about nothing. And that's totally fine. Not everything has to be deep. So it depends on the, لِكُلِّ مَقَامٍ مَقَالٍ is the Arabic statement. So for every station or every state, there is a statement to be said. There is a context to the conversations. Even with some students of knowledge and teachers, if you hear some of the conversations we engage in, you would think like, what is going on over here? You don't communicate well verbally, that's just going to come with practice. So you have to put yourself in situations, and this has to require some courage on your part. You have to basically put yourself out there in a position where you have to do that. And the way to do it, I could tell you, and it's the only reason I'm not doing this right now is because I just haven't figured out how to maneuver my timing so that I can put it in my schedule. But I'm a lot better at reading Spanish, for example, than I am at writing it. And I'm a lot better at writing Spanish than I am at speaking it. So what's the problem here? Well, the problem is there are situations where I can actually go, there's a Wednesday thing here. It's like a Wednesday night coffee, Spanish coffee. Not like the coffee being Spanish, but like a group gathers together under a Spanish tutor, and just having coffee, and they just have a conversation in Spanish, and you have to engage in Spanish and put yourself out there in a vulnerable position where it's like, I'm not really good at this. But I actually noticed, and I saw when I used to go to them in Victoria, you actually see a progression of people becoming better and better and better and better over time, because they're putting themselves in that position. And things that they do outside of that is now they're able to watch Spanish movies, and they're able to listen to Spanish music and understand what's being said, and so on and so forth. But it always starts off with, you have to put yourself in that vulnerable position and in a place of learning. So one thing you can do is, Nivea, is find if you have a Toastmasters in your location, and they're usually all over the place. Just search Toastmasters. It's a place dedicated, it's a thing, it's a group of people that get together with the purpose of improving verbal communication, improving your ability to speak in public. So that's what you can do there. So that's kind of just some thoughts for you to maybe, hopefully that helps you out. But yeah, just before I move on to the next one, do not think of yourself in that way and put yourself down. This is not who you are, and you don't have to accept it. You're talking about modifiable behavioral patterns, things that you can work on. And anything that you can work on, you can always improve. It just takes a little bit of time, a little bit of patience, and don't be so hard on yourself. The only time that I'm hard on myself is when I'm really just being lazy. Like, get off your butt and do something. Like, why are you, like right now, I'm actually, now mentioning this, I'm kind of mad at myself that I haven't been putting more time into, practicing Spanish. I should start, man, because I'm desiring right now. I've been having this urge that I want to start writing in Spanish, which would be interesting. Baitullah Sharku asks, I am a brother from Kosovo, currently a student of biology sciences, so I would like to ask you a question that is really important for me. I was born to a secular family here in Kosovo, but thank God I had some friends who helped me about my religion, and now Islam is a very important part of my life. But my concern is that I'm really stressed, almost depressed, to the fact that during my studies in biology, I could face any argument that is contrary to the teachings of Hadith or Quran. That's why I'm so afraid I don't know what to do. Please, can you guide me okay, so let's see. So I guess English is just not the first language, so I'm going to try to rephrase this. Can you please guide me to some books that contain all hadith and religious arguments towards my field, so I could manage which part of science to accept and which part to avoid? I hope it is clear. Desperate for your response. Baitullah, it's kind of hard for me to recommend a single book that has everything that is like, all right, so you can accept this and reject that. Science is a very big enterprise, and it's a process. So here's the deal. Number one, science is not a thing. It's not a set of facts. People talk about it like it's a set of facts. It's not a set of facts. Science is a process. It's a methodology. It's an approach. This approach yields information about the empirical world. This information could sometimes be accurate in the way that we construct it and put it together into a model, and oftentimes could be inaccurate. Now, we utilize our intellect to study this limited empirical world and put together these models that help us engage with it in a way that benefits us. Now, the danger with it is sometimes we can fall prey into our own intellect, and we start to believe our own selves and start to think that we got it all figured out. So the way science is being taught is problematic because of that. They teach it as a thing, and it's not a thing, it's a process. So because it's a process, it's anybody that tries to write a text that tells you you can accept this or reject that, it's going to be a problem. Because you know what, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, I mean, if you think about, for example, just the theory of evolution, evolutionary theory, it's a powerful theory, it's a good model, it's all of that stuff, but it's 150 years old. I mean, who's to say that for sure, 100%, it is going to be the final statement on everything? You can't say that. So you just kind of go along. We just happen to be alive during a period of time in which some scientific theories have power, explanatory power, and people that are in powerful positions in academia and research, they're the ones that are deciding that this is what is true. And I don't like that word, but that's the way that they teach it. And so the way that it's being taught as a thing can create these conflicts for you. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. Now, you're concerned about you could face something. You know what? At any point in time, we could all come up against an argument that we don't have an answer for. If you live your life in fear of, I could come across something, so I need to have all the answers right now, you're going to be depressed like you are saying right now. I think what you should do, Baytullah, is relax a little bit and look at your life, as I mentioned at the very beginning, as a journey of discovery. And as a journey of discovery, you could come across some things. The reason you're a Muslim is not because of some scientific facts, right? So I think you should study a little bit of Aqeedah. I've plugged this so many times, but I'm going to redirect you to it. Go listen to my series. You could find it on SoundCloud if you just want to listen to the audio, and it's uploaded on YouTube as well. The Creed of Deliverance. It's like just 9 videos. Just listen to them. Listen to what I have to say over there. I teach a small Aqeedah text there. It's a recording of an audio recording of lessons that I taught. And I think the way I taught that was to give you the tools so that you understand how arguments work, period. How does an argument work? So that you don't have to worry about things, but you just worry about how the structure of the argument is. So you understand, first of all, why you're a Muslim, and when to accept or reject some things with regards to the scientific claims. Because science is not about truth, it's a process, not a thing. So I hope this helps you out a little bit, Baytullah. But you can always come back and send a message again. Hamza Ali, I wanted to ask if you could do a video about speech and connecting with individuals on a personal level. I find this very difficult to do, especially when I am not comfortable or in a group situation. As a result, I find that people don't take me seriously, and this gets me vexed. However, I want to be a teacher and a public speaker when I'm older, and I need to learn these skills now. I'll tell you what I told Nivea. Toastmasters! You gotta go to Toastmasters. I personally haven't done it, but I've seen the results of people that have done it who used to be very awkward and very uncomfortable in group settings, in teaching settings where they're trying to give a public talk or something like that. I've seen drastic improvements of people that go to Toastmasters and just put themselves in that position. What you need is a place that everybody has agreed to the rules of engagement. And the rules of engagement is, we all have a problem. We all want to improve our public speaking skills. We all want to be better and less awkward in our social communication. So let's all work on this. And so there is kind of like a zero judgment zone in that sense. And that's what you need. It's almost like what we do, for example, for us in clinical-based learning, case-based learning, and in clinical coaching. Everybody recognizes none of us are physicians yet, and we're all practicing and we're all learning. And so if you're gonna make a fool of yourself, better do it now. And you're not gonna be a fool because you're still learning. You don't know anything. That's why we're doing this. So I would say go to Toastmasters and engage in these processes and find groups in your locality. There are like philosophy groups, and there are like public speaking groups, and there are different subjects that people discuss. They happen all over the city, in major cities at least. And you just have to search online and just go and engage with them, and you'll find yourself becoming a better person afterwards. So that's what I would recommend you do, Hamza. Last question, Athar Khalid. Do you think doubts can be a product of just not putting in enough effort to gain certainty? Is certainty even something you can gain? I mean, there are some people who become Muslim and they're so certain, and you can tell because of how they carry their religion and stand up for it and so on. This has to do with personality, I think, more so than certainty per se. There are people whose personality is just a very strong personality, and they assert themselves in a way that other people may not be able to. And so it comes across like that, like, oh, this person is really certain to a degree that I'm not, and so maybe I'm a lesser Muslim or something like that. So there is that to keep in mind. But you gotta, I mean, I mentioned this before earlier in this podcast, and I've mentioned it in several contexts and occasions. You really have to give credit to time. You know, if the way I speak about Islam today and my conviction in it is not the same as it was, 10 years ago. It's just not. I'm speaking like, and that's not to say that I wasn't certain before, but there is this effect of time and constant reading and constant, the number of times I've recited the Quran up until 10 years ago is less than the amount of times that I've recited the Quran up until now. Like, the collective time from when I was born until 10 years ago versus from when I was born until now, of course, till now, it's much more. And so that has an impact on the heart. That has something on the heart. The amount of times I've sent salawat on the Prophet ﷺ has an impact on the heart. The activities that I engage in, all of these things have impacts on my heart. So the certainty I speak with now is not the same as it was 10 years ago. And I pray that it's not also the same as 10 years from now if I live if I live till then. I hope that I'm going to become more and more certain as I go, and it's just because it's an accumulative effect. It's a cumulative effect. I see that the truth of it manifests even more and more. And that's not to say that, this is another issue, maybe just as an aside. People think that, I'm going to come across something that's going to make me doubt. The basic principles of the religion, what you base your belief on, are actually very basic fundamental foundations that an unlettered, uneducated person can grasp with. Islam is not a complicated religion in that way. It's a simple religion from what it expects from you to believe theologically. But it is not a simpleton religion. All that you do over time is you build these complexities on top of the very basic foundation, but it's a very solid foundation. That's why the Prophet ﷺ was a Nabi al-Ummi. He is the unlettered prophet. This religion speaks to the lowest common denominator from an educational perspective. It speaks to the fitrah. It speaks to that part of you that you don't need to have a philosophy degree or a theology degree to understand it. So it's not just about effort, it's also about time. People think like, I need to become even more religious and go into doing more things and pray more and do these things. You know what? The Prophet ﷺ said, أَحَبُّ الْأَعْمَالِ إِلَى اللَّهِ أَدْوَمُهَا وَإِنْ قَلَّ. The most beloved actions to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are the ones that you are more consistent with, even if it's just a little bit. And even with a little bit, you will find yourself gaining that certainty over time, getting stronger and stronger. Now, you do not want to lead all of your life doing exactly the same thing. You want to change things up because you're after improvement. So at the time of recording this podcast, we're less than a month away from Ramadan. You need to look at Ramadan as a yearly time when you up the ante. You increase your load. So every Ramadan, I personally make it a practice that every Ramadan, a lot of us in Ramadan, we just go all out and we do so many things, and then we burn out by the end of the month, and then we regress back to our original state before we entered the month of Ramadan. You need to look at your Ramadan as a checkpoint every year, where when you enter Ramadan, you're in one state doing a set number of activities. By the time you exit, you're in another state, you're in an elevated state, but you also added one thing that to your routine, to your daily religious practice, to whatever it is that you do, that you added it on, and you are going to stay consistent with it for the rest of your life. And then the next Ramadan you add something else on, and you do this over time, and it accumulates over time. So, and it doesn't have to be an act of worship, like a ritual act, like we think of ritual, you know. People think, oh, I'm going to add like another prayer. It doesn't have to be that. It could be as little as dedicating a dua, just sitting down and raising your hands every night before you go to sleep and praying for whoever, praying for people, praying for forgiveness for people, or doing something. Like, I'll give you an example of something you can start doing. And maybe we'll talk about it at length in another time. But, you know, the Prophet ﷺ was sitting with the companions, and I shared this story before, but it's an authentic hadith. The Prophet ﷺ is sitting with the companions, and he says to them, a man is going to enter from that gate, and he was at the masjid in Medina, and he said, a man is going to enter from that gate, and this is going to be a person from paradise. He's of the people of paradise. So the man enters, does his prayer. Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu followed the man for 3 days or something like that. And he observed him. He noticed that he did nothing extra. This guy was as average Joe as they come, or average Abdullah, shall we say, as they come. There was nothing special about him that he could see. So he figured maybe it's something he does at home. So he pretended to be a traveler and met up with him, and he said, I need to stay with somebody. Now, being a good Muslim, he said, I can have you as a guest in my home. So Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu observes him at home, nothing extra. The guy doesn't even get up at night to pray. There was nothing different about him. So after a while, he just said, all right, I'm fed up with this. Like, I need to figure out what it is that this man does that the Prophet ﷺ would say about him, he's of the people of paradise. So he told him, listen, sorry, I was just trying to figure out, he told him what happened, the Prophet ﷺ, and what he said. And he told him who he was. He said, I'm just trying to figure out what it is that you do. And so the man said, I don't know. The only thing I could think of that I do is at night, every day, before I go to sleep, I reflect on my day. I reflect on everything that I've done. And anybody that's ever wronged me, anybody that I have any enmity with, I take that away from my heart. I remove it from my heart. And how can you remove it? You can pray for people, you can forgive, you can declare, you can actually make a prayer where you say, oh Allah, please forgive anybody who has ever wronged me today. I do not want to take them into account. So please don't take them into account. Forgive them for anything they've said against me or have done against me. I'm freeing them. I don't want an accounting for them. And in fact, please guide them and improve their livelihood and improve their station and elevate them, and just pray for the people that wronged you. That's one thing you can do, that you can add to your routine. And you know what? Your personal conviction, certainty, spiritual state, from that one little action that you do, praying for people who wrong you, is indescribable. So why don't you start doing that? I mean, these are the things. People think like, oh, I want to do something extra, so they just automatically think to the direct, I need to recite Quran, extra Quran, or I need to pray, or I need to fast Mondays and Thursdays. And these are good things to do. But there are these little things, these little nuggets that you can engage in for the sake of gaining the pleasure of Allah. And here's a thought. You ask Allah to forgive you, then He sends you people that wrong you, and then you don't want to forgive them? I mean, think about that. Forgive so that you can be forgiven. Show it. You want forgiveness? All right, let's see how you're going to do. At any rate, I hope that answers your question, Athar. And everybody who sent, I really do appreciate your questions. I apologize for not having responded sooner or more directly, but I hope this kind of evens it out. And I seek for your forgiveness for not having done it sooner. Before we end this, the usual plugs, guys. I would really appreciate it if you guys can just go to iTunes, rate the show, this podcast, boost it up on the ratings, write a review if you feel compelled to write a review, and share it. Tag me on Twitter so that I can retweet it at Muhammad Gilan. So it's MohamedGhilan, and you can find me on Facebook, Andalus Online, and you can support. In addition to that, your support would be through patreon.com/Muhammad Gilan. You can become a patron. You can donate directly to andalusonline.org. Or better yet, become a member of Andalus Book Club, and I can see you on a monthly basis at the live webinar. I think we'll leave it at that, guys. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.